I couldn't stop staring at the line where my name was signed. The J curled wrong, just a little too eager, like someone overthinking it. And that's what did it. Not the fact of the forgery, but the familiarity. It wasn't random. It was rehearsed. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed, listening to the soft wheeze of the ceiling fan and the ticking of the old wall clock I'd meant to take down for years. Every sound felt sharper, like the whole house was holding its breath with me. In the morning, I made copies of every paper I had. I didn't cry, not even when I pulled out the manila folder where I'd kept the original deed, the one I'd signed in good faith, with a smile and a handshake, never imagining I'd have to defend my own name from the people who raised me. I drove to a small law office off Augusta Road, a place I'd passed 100 times, but never had reason to enter. The lawyer, Ruth, was in her 50s, wore quiet clothes, and looked me in the eye like she'd seen this kind of damage before. She said it was a strong case. I said I pressed charges. I don't remember how I sounded. What I do remember is this. On the drive home, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot, sat in my car, and stared at my hands on the steering wheel. Same hands that used to rake my parents' leaves, fix their sink, wire their light switches. Same hands they'd now used against me. I never thought the hardest fight of my life would be with my own family, not over politics, religion, or some childhood wound that never healed. No, it was over paperwork, the kind with forged signatures and hidden agendas. I was 47 when I bought that house on Pine Hollow Road. Nothing fancy, just 3 bedrooms, a sunroom with cracked tiles, and a yard I'd spent 2 years nursing into something green. I called it mine not because it was big or new, but because I bled for it. 10-hour shifts, skip vacations, tuna out of cans. Every shingle on that roof cost me something. Then one day, my parents asked if I'd consider signing it over to my brother, Isaac. He had kids, they said. He needed stability. I remember standing in their kitchen, still smelling of drywall dust, listening as they explained why my sacrifice should become his inheritance. I told them no. Firm, not cruel. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't know, was that they'd already tried to take it. The twist came 2 weeks later when I got a call from my mortgage company asking why I hadn't signed the refinance papers. Refinance? I hadn't touched a damn thing. That's when I drove downtown, parked in a metered spot I couldn't afford, and demanded to see the documents. There was my name, my signature, only it wasn't mine. Isaac's kids might have needed a backyard, but apparently my identity was fair game too. There's a part of me, maybe the most foolish part, that still thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe my dad didn't know what he was signing. Maybe Isaac talked him into it, sweet-talked him like he always could, playing the helpless father of 3 card he'd mastered years ago. I kept trying to write it off as weakness instead of betrayal. But then I found the second set of documents. They'd been sloppy, not careless, just not expecting me to look too close. And why would they? I was the dependable one, the silent partner in their survival. I wasn't supposed to question things. Wasn't supposed to ask why a second loan appeared on my credit report with a lender I'd never contacted. Wasn't supposed to pull up the county clerk site and see that my signature had been notarized in a town I hadn't visited in over a decade. So I did what I always do when things stop making sense. I cleaned. Vacuumed the house top to bottom. Rearranged the garage. Scrubbed the grout between the bathroom tiles. And as I was shampooing the carpet in the living room, I noticed something strange. A faint line where the furniture used to be. A boundary. I remembered moving that couch with Isaac 6 months earlier when I'd helped him load his old one into a borrowed truck. He'd stayed for a beer after. I remembered that. We'd sat in that room, just 2 brothers watching a game, laughing like nothing was wrong. That was before the mortgage company called. Before the second forged signature. Before I realized the couch had been moved, not just for company, but for conversation, the kind that didn't include me. That night I sat on that same couch and made a list. Not a dramatic one. Just a list of everything I'd paid for in the last 5 years. Every invoice. Every trip to Home Depot. Every Sunday, I'd driven across town to change their HVAC filter or fix the damn garbage disposal because Dad said he couldn't get under the sink anymore. I tallied it all, not out of bitterness, but clarity. I needed to see it in numbers. The cost of my loyalty. It came out to just under $58,000. When I saw the number, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it proved something I'd always suspected. I was never their son. I was their contingency plan, and now that I wasn't playing the part, they were panicking. The text started small, reminders, questions, veiled guilt trips. Then came the calls. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. And then Isaac showed up at my front door. No warning. No heads up. Just standing there like he'd forgotten everything that came before. He smiled like we were still those kids who used to race bikes down Laurel Creek Lane. Said mom and dad were having a tough time, and maybe I could help out just this once. Said we're family, and that family forgives. I stood there, one hand on the doorframe, and realized that I'd been carrying a grudge disguised as hope for years. And the worst part? I'd mistaken their silence for peace. It wasn't peace. It was a plan. I didn't slam the door in Isaac's face. I didn't yell. I didn't do anything dramatic, which, in hindsight, probably confused him more than anything. I just listened, arms crossed, as he stood there spewing phrases like family obligation, and they're not getting any younger. I nodded occasionally, but mostly I was studying him. The way he kept looking past me, like he couldn't stand to make eye contact for too long. The way his hands fidgeted, tugging at the sleeves of a shirt I was pretty sure our mother had ironed for him. When he finished, I said I'd think about it. Not because I needed time, but because I needed distance, space to sit with the truth of what this was. Not just betrayal, not just theft, but the slow erosion of every boundary I thought I had. And it started long before this mess. It started with the first time I fixed something and didn't send a receipt. The first time I said yes when I wanted to say I can't. The first time they looked at Isaac, the boy with the crooked smile and endless excuses, and decided he needed protecting while I could handle the weight of them all. You wear that label long enough, the responsible one, and it starts to harden into your spine. You stop asking for help. Stop saying no. And one day, you wake up in a house you bought with no one left who remembers what it cost you to get there. That night, I opened an old box I kept in the hall closet. It had pictures from when we were kids, family vacations, school plays, backyard birthday parties. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe I thought nostalgia would someday fill the gaps forgiveness never could. There was one photo I couldn't look away from. Me at maybe 15, standing behind Isaac with my hands on his shoulders, grinning like I didn't know yet how things would turn out. Our parents are behind us, arms around each other, smiling for the camera, like we were some happy suburban unit instead of the machine they built to funnel their hopes into one son and their needs into the other. I held that photo for a long time. Then I slid it back into the box and taped it shut. Some things deserve to be buried before they bury you. They say anger burns hot, but mine never did. It wasn't rage that moved me. It was something quieter, like a floorboard that finally gives after years of pressure. The next morning, I drove to the sheriff's office and filed a formal complaint. I handed over the documents, the forged refinance papers, the mortgage printouts, even a copy of my real signature for comparison. The deputy flipped through them, eyebrows lifting higher with each page. He said he'd never seen family fraud this cleanly done. I said I wish I could be proud of that. Then I drove home, parked in my usual spot, and just sat there. The house looked the same, vinyl siding, faded shutters, the little crack in the front step I kept meaning to patch. It was ordinary, but inside those walls, something had finally shifted. I walked straight to my office, opened my laptop, and began freezing every account tied to my name. Credit monitoring, utility bills, subscriptions, anything they might have piggybacked on over the years. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't their first time. It had been going on in pieces. Credit card pre-approvals, small balances, odd inquiries. All those signs I'd written off as noise. Now, they formed a pattern, and the pattern had my parents' fingerprints all over it. That evening, my mother called again. I let it ring. Then my father. Then Isaac. All back to back, like a chorus out of sync, but clinging to the same broken tune. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to explain that forgiveness, in this case, would be another way of saying, take more. Instead, I opened a new note on my phone and titled it, Lines I Won't Cross Again. I listed only one thing, letting love become leverage. I didn't sleep much that night, but when I did, I dreamed of the house, quiet, empty, still mine. And in the dream, no one else had a key. It's strange, the things you notice when the noise stops. I'd spent so many years checking in. Weekly calls to see how the roof was holding up, surprise drop-ins to change batteries and smoke detectors. Texts like, you need anything, and I'll grab the groceries. Now, nothing. The silence wasn't loud. It was dense. I'd wake up, check my phone, and see nothing but ads and weather alerts. No guilt la fe de reminders. No, hey, your mother's upset. No demands disguised as family concern. Just space. And I didn't know what to do with it. I thought the quiet would feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like standing in a familiar room where all the furniture had been stolen. One morning, about 2 weeks into the silence, I drove past their house, the one I used to treat like a second job. The yard hadn't been mowed. The porch light flickered. A package sat untouched on the steps. I didn't stop, just kept driving, slower than I needed to. I passed Isaac's car parked outside. Still the same beat-up Honda with a dent in the side panel he swore he'd fix once things settled down. I guess things never settled. Later that week, I got a voicemail from my mother. She didn't say much. Her voice was small, unfamiliar. She said they missed me, said they were worried, said they didn't mean for it to happen this way. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "We thought you didn't need us." I played that line over at least a dozen times. Not because it explained anything, but because it exposed something. They hadn't seen my help as love. They'd seen it as distance. A way for me to feel superior. A way for me to opt out emotionally while contributing practically. Like wiring a house, but never stepping inside. I almost called her back. Thumb hovering over the screen. I even hit her name once before locking my phone and setting it down. Because that's what they always wanted. Not clarity, but closure on their terms. And this time, I wasn't giving it. I started noticing how much lighter the house felt. Not in some spiritual, poetic way. I mean literally. There was room in the fridge because I wasn't buying extra groceries just in case Mom stopped by. The guest room stayed made, not lived in. I had hot water in the mornings because I wasn't sharing it with someone who forgot to tell me they were staying the night. The house was still mine, but now it finally felt like mine. I spent a weekend cleaning out the attic. Not because I needed the space, but because I wanted to know what I'd been storing all these years. I found boxes of old tax records, receipts from tools I'd bought for their repairs, and a Christmas card from Isaac's kids, the one Mom clearly wrote on their behalf. The handwriting was hers, so was the guilt laced between the lines. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood there, holding that card, and felt a strange kind of peace. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it finally made sense. They didn't just favor Isaac. They depended on him staying broken, so they could feel needed. And I was never a son in that setup. I was the scaffolding, the thing you build around, not for. I shredded the card. Monday came and went without incident. Then Tuesday, I got a certified letter in the mail. My name on the envelope, but not in my parents' handwriting. It was from their attorney. A request to settle the misunderstanding outside of court. They called it a misunderstanding. 3 pages of carefully worded legalese, asking for a reconsideration of the criminal complaint in exchange for restored family trust. I didn't laugh. I didn't even get angry. I just folded the letter back up, placed it in a drawer, and walked outside. The grass was long again. I pulled out the mower and started cutting, back and forth methodical. It felt good, familiar. A ritual, because sometimes healing doesn't look like closure. Sometimes it looks like lines in the yard where you reclaim your life, one row at a time. I hadn't planned to go. Not really. But something about holding that letter, reading those vague, lawyered-up apologies, made me realize I needed to see it for myself. So I drove to their house. Not to reconcile. Not to forgive. Just to look them in the eye without the weight of pretending. The driveway was empty except for Isaac's car. Of course. I parked across the street and sat for a while, engine running, fingers drumming against the wheel. Then I killed the ignition and walked up to the front door, the same door I used to unlock with a key I no longer carried. I knocked. No answer. Then I tried again, harder. Eventually, the door creaked open, and there stood my father. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller. The kind of small that doesn't come from age, but from exposure, like something left out too long. He didn't say anything. Just stepped aside. The house smelled the same. That mix of old carpet, fading potpourri, and something like guilt. I stood in the living room, taking it in. The spot where I used to fix the TV. The table I'd helped refinish. The cracked picture frame still holding a photo of Isaac's wedding. Mine was never displayed. Mom came in from the hallway. She looked tired. Or maybe I just saw her clearly for the first time. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. I didn't want words. Not rehearsed ones. Not the ones meant to soften what couldn't be undone. Instead, I pulled out a copy of the letter they'd sent me. Unfolded it slowly, like it was a map back to something they'd willingly lost. "This isn't clarity," I said. "It's cleanup." They both looked down. Not in shame. In habit. I didn't stay long. Didn't sit. Didn't offer any hollow promises about someday. Before I left, I paused at the threshold, looked back once, and said the only thing that still needed saying. I kept the house. Then I walked out, closed the door behind me, and felt the weight shift. Not disappear. Just shift. Sometimes that's enough. There's a moment after the storm when the air feels wrong. Like it's waiting for the next strike. But then you realize, no, this is just what calm feels like when you're not used to it. I started keeping track of small things. The nights I slept through without waking up in dread. The mornings where I didn't check my phone before making coffee. The weekends that didn't involve hauling bags of mulch for someone else's lawn. It wasn't healing exactly, more like inventory of what I had, what I lost, what I didn't miss at all. I sat on the porch one Saturday, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, and made a list in my notebook. House, still mine. Credit score, recovering. Trust in family, fractured beyond repair. Self-respect, finally, not negotiable. Somewhere along the line, I stopped expecting an apology. I stopped needing one. Because here's the thing about people who betray you. They rarely explain why in a way that helps. They explain it in a way that soothes their conscience. And I'd spent too many years doing the emotional math for everyone else. Making excuses, translating their silence into love, their guilt into good intentions. That was over. The house, this simple, creaking house on Pine Hollow, had been mine all along. Not because my name was on a deed, but because I'd built a life inside it that didn't depend on anyone else's permission to matter. A neighbor waved as she passed, walking her dog. I waved back, and for once, I didn't wonder if she'd heard the rumors. I didn't care. That evening, I cooked for myself, not out of spite, not out of loneliness. Just because I wanted to. I sat at my own table, ate my own meal, and felt the kind of solitude that doesn't demand filling. Sometimes peace doesn't come as a revelation. Sometimes it just comes as a quiet night where nothing hurts. There are still reminders. An old sweater of my dad's I used to borrow on cold mornings, buried in the back of the hall closet. A screwdriver set my mom gifted me one Christmas, still in its cracked plastic case, the one with her handwriting on the tag. A photo of Isaac's kids tucked into a book I hadn't opened in years, creased from time and casual neglect. I didn't throw them out. I thought I would. I thought the day would come when I'd dump everything they touched into a trash bag, toss it on the curb, and call it closure. But instead, I left them where they were. Not out of sentiment, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Some things weren't mine to fix. And maybe I never should have tried. They'd left behind more than objects. They left behind a version of me I can't get back. The son who said yes before thinking. The brother who paid and never asked why the balance never shifted. The man who believed that if he gave enough, he'd be chosen. That version's gone. What's left is quieter, more patient, less trusting, but more honest. There's strength in that, I think. I started writing things down, not for therapy, not for revenge, just to remember. A habit I picked up one night when I couldn't sleep. A notebook on the nightstand became a place for pieces of thought, things I wish I'd said, things I hope I never say again. One page, near the middle, says, you don't have to make sense of it to survive it. And under that, you only have to stop making room for what keeps breaking you. It's not profound, but it's enough. And maybe that's what healing actually is. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of perspective. There's a myth people love, that cutting ties is cruel. That choosing yourself means burning bridges. But I've learned something quieter, something steadier. Sometimes the bridge was never safe to begin with. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. I kept the house. That sounds simple, but it's everything. I kept the chipped sunroom tiles I never replaced. I kept the patchy lawn I still mow in crooked lines. I kept the porch swing that creaks like an old man with stories he doesn't want to tell. I kept it all. Not because it's perfect, because it's mine. The phone doesn't ring much anymore. Holidays are quiet. Birthdays come and go. No cards. No casseroles. Just me, a few friends, and a dog I adopted from a shelter last fall. A quiet old mutt named Harvey who doesn't expect anything but food, walks, and space to lie in the sun. Some days that still stings. The absence, the silence, the knowledge that blood isn't a guarantee of loyalty. But pain, I've learned, is not always a warning. Sometimes it's just a marker of where you were cut and how far you've come since. I sit out on the porch some evenings, coffee in one hand, notebook in the other, writing small truths one at a time. I don't write for anyone to read them. I write to hear myself think. There's a comfort in knowing no one's coming to save you, because it means everything you have, you chose to keep. So here's what I kept. My name, my dignity, and the keys to a house I no longer owe to anyone.